so much for joining me on the Creative Awakening Now podcast. I'm your host, David Matters, and I'm here to bring you stories, interviews, and insights relating to the topics of creativity, inspiration, and practice. My intention is to connect with other people who employ a heart-centered approach to the artistic process and to share this profoundly inspiring content with anyone who cares to hear it. I hope you enjoy. This is a dream, and a dream is never the same. My guest this week was Jeremy Schewe. As the founder of Enchanted Journeys, Jeremy has been leading international sacred site retreats, socio-economic service trips, and conservation-based eco-adventures for 10 years. Jeremy is an ecologist, botanist, tree keeper, and community activator who has worked around the world for the past 15 years with indigenous and at-risk communities. In this capacity, he has helped to develop large-scale conservation plans and improve economic opportunities for indigenous communities. Jeremy has helped to found several other ventures, including Unaka Environmental LLC and ecobot LLC. Jeremy is an avid outdoorsman and athlete. He has 22 years experience practicing and 14 years teaching Qigong and Tao-Yin meditation. Jeremy helps gather energy and people together in powerful and often life-changing multimedia and multidimensional experiences. Jeremy also just wrote and published a book, Ports of Entry, and we got to talk about that on this interview as well. And we went into a lot of cool stuff. He's involved in all kinds of things, and the Enchanted Journeys thing as well as his Wildman retreats that he hosts in different places. A lot of it in Asheville, but he does a lot of stuff around the world actually. And so we go into that, and what his vision was with all that, and how it came about, and his whole story, getting into Tai Chi or Qigong rather, and different energy works, and all his creative aspects as well that have brought him to where he is. And he's got a really rich background, and it was a great interview. We got to touch on some really cool stuff in his work that a lot of people probably don't know about. And also, like I said, we went into his book and kind of talked about what his process was for writing that, and what is contained within. And he also kind of breaks it down, like how it was written and what it all kind of means, because it's pretty deep stuff. He likes to go deep, and that it was a really cool conversation because of that. We didn't just skim across the surface with this one. We went into it, and yeah, I love it. I love these kind of things where we can connect creative activities with these deeper transformational experiences, and everyone's got their own way, their own approach to it when they're involved in these kind of things. And Jeremy's was quite unique and well-rounded, I guess you could say. So yeah, it was a lot of fun talking about that. And he's got a bunch of stuff coming up. I'm gonna have the links on here as always, and you can check out the Wildman retreats and the Enchanted Journey things that he's doing for the ones that are coming up. And I believe he has a couple of the next coming months actually. So definitely check that out if you're interested. Also look for his book. It's out and available. And yeah, so I hope you guys really enjoy this. As always, I hope you'll check out my work at Creative Awakening Now. Check out my blogs, and you can get my free ebook by signing up for the email list. I definitely encourage you to do that. Check out some music from my band Life Like Water. We got some interesting things in the works. Life is just crazy for all of us right now, and we're working towards shifting things a bit and keeping it interesting. So if you're into that music and you're into the things that I got going on, check everything out on Creative Awakening Now. And if you guys would be interested in helping out the podcast, the best thing you could do is go into iTunes. If you have the iTunes app, or if you listen to it on a different platform, you could still leave a comment or things, but going into iTunes and rating it, giving it stars, and leaving a little review of it is super helpful, and I greatly appreciate that. So if you feel so inclined, I would be so grateful. So thanks as always for listening, and I really hope you enjoy this one. We'll catch you next time. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thank you, Jeremy, for being here with me today.
Of course.
Of course. Well, I brought you on mostly because of your new book. I heard about it, and I checked out. I haven't got a chance to read it yet, but I checked out some of the stuff that you've been posting on it, and it looked really interesting. And we met at Levolution a couple years ago, you were doing some Qigong. I attended it was like a holotropic breathwork class that you were leading, and you do all kinds of cool stuff. So I'd be down to just kind of get a brief overview of your whole history, what got you into this kind of stuff, and in my mind, it's all related to, this very deep, I don't know, a spiritual kind of connection to a lot of stuff that you do. So maybe if you can show us how those patterns weave together, that'd be really cool.
Sure. Let's see how to weave a multi-leveled universe and timelines into a few moments is always a fun task. So my journey of awakening, perhaps tying it into your show here, began when I was 17. Most of my friends in high school were going on drinking and sex binge trips down to coastal Carolinas or Georgia, and I went with a friend to do my first vision quest up in the mountains here in the Smokies at the edge of the Cherokee Reservation, and began a journey of deep inquiry and awakening and remembrance and connectivity of my soul and its relationship with the landscape. Fast forward a few years, I'm a dreamer, and so a lot of my dreams as I moved into my college years started drawing me out to the Southwest. I started seeing visions of a woman surrounded by wildcats, mountain lions, etc., standing on top of this mesa, and followed that until I met one of her students on top of the mesa while I was at a full moon drum experience in Sedona, and she saw the thread and introduced me, so I studied with her for a year. A little bit of traveling around in the Southwest, but I mostly was living in Flagstaff, going to school, studying herbal medicine with my teacher, Delphina Rose. And again, dreams and visions kept showing me the Green Dragon, kept showing me the Southern Appalachian Mountains. And so I moved here to finish my undergraduate work, to also focus on the internal studies, Kundalini Awakening with the North Carolina School of Natural Healing in its infantile stages with Craig and Peggy Ellis. Had a lovely time with them. In the meantime, also found two people teaching crane flying Qigong, which I practiced for a good 8 years before I took on any other forms. I think probably the next most amenable step is the more time I spent here in the mountains, the more timelessness I was able to step into, and thus become more actively aware of my own heritage, moving through my body, through my blood, through my bones, through my DNA, and its reflection in my soul. And so I was, of course, drawn to my mom's motherland of Ireland, as well as to Scandinavia and to Switzerland, and spent a lot of time working and living over there and visiting the sacred sites. And this is all in my early and mid-20s, and so this really gave me a very strong quickening forward into where I am today, where we're doing dream work. I'm teaching an Irish Celtic Mysteries program that's a year-round program. Occasionally teach Qigong at retreats and programs, but I'm also very much in this world as well. As a scientist, I work with environmental assessments, environmental restoration projects around the world, as well as indigenous rights projects, at-risk community rights, and then also helping with the interface of the closure of a lot of old industrial facilities. So I'm both a druid of the other world and a druid of this world, doing the work that is necessary to maintain the balance and harmonies of the planet.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and there's more, but that's a good surface. I think one piece that I really want to add into that, began with, it started here in these mountains, and is now threaded through much of the world. But a big piece of the work that I've been involved with, both individually as well with the groups and the other emissaries that I work with, is recognizing when certain sacred places on the planet are singing us, when they're asking us to remember remember and re-embody latent aspects of our heritage that is beyond time. And a big piece of that is the magnetization back to the sacred places of our ancestry, and to invite others of similar ancestry or of their own ancestry to follow their own trajectories or their own routes back to where perhaps one aspect or two aspects or more of their ancestral dream line as well as DNA ties back to the world tree or to the sacred center of their heritage. And kind of working with unlocking the codex within our consciousness to get to that place. So.
Wow. That's a heavy intro right there. I love it. Just lay it on there, man. That's awesome. I always appreciate when people just kind of go right to the heart of what inspires them and what really connects them to their passion. And clearly yours is pretty broad. You got a lot going on there, but from what I'm hearing, there's a lot of just roots in the earth, like a big connection to the earth. And I know you do stuff kind of all over the world now with Wildman Journeys, Wild Soul Journeys, and where you're connecting with the earth and you're helping people kind of establish that connection with other people and with themselves. And it's really cool work, man. And I would love for you to maybe kind of hone in a little bit more on either how you started the Wildman Journeys or the the other stuff that you do with the sacred sites, wherever you want to go with it. I'd like to just to know how you kind of turn that into a living, or at least a form of personal practice and journey that you're sharing with other people.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so I guess one of the most important things is a belief, and beliefs are structures, and structures define. And so I love to look at places where structure and belief can be released, but at the same time be respected. And so one of the things that's really key in this journey is understanding this relationship of being a way shower and looking into the other way showers in the world. Some people like to quickly go to a place of teacher, and my preference is to remind people that we simply maybe we can acknowledge the place or the routes that we have gone down in a strong way. So for example, if I've been down a certain path behind my house to a certain secret waterfall by an ancient tree, I know how to get there. And so therefore I can be a way shower to you when you hear like, oh, there's this amazing thing that Jeremy knows how to get to, let's go there. Whereas I've never done any sort of radio talk show type thing, so you're a way shower for me in that way. I'm very undigital in many ways.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, here's a place that I can plug in and find something. So that said, to tie it back around to the essence of your question, my beliefs have been firmly based in a sense of belonging in place, coming from strong family, coming from strong sense of belonging in this world, and a container created in order to pursue the necessary right hemisphere of the mind at the same time as the left hemisphere of the mind, and marrying it to the heart. So follow the heart. And so that thread brings me to what you're speaking of here. And so first with the wild man, like what I found was a lot of the men's work that I was touching into, starting in my around 30. They were very, very heavily process centric, and they were also very heavily designed based on a lot of what the women were doing in the women's movement, which had been around a lot longer. And I found that I never felt nurtured in a lot of those environments. I often felt like I showed up to some sort of men's circle or men's event, and I felt exhausted. It felt too heady. It felt too much like hanging out in a safe place of the mind and not really getting into the body. And then, the little snippets that we have of true experience were very brief, and then the rest of the time was spent talking about it, discussing it, which of course allows people to very quickly drift back into whatever their steady state of consciousness is. And so what I was interested in was, okay, where are the places in my life where I have had the most profound changes? And those moments have come when I have been out by myself fasting, or I've been with a group of people having a powerful experience between the worlds. Maybe being in a plant medicine journey where there's an experience where you don't, like, oh, I've got this great idea for a second. Let me stop everything and sit and journal about it for 4 hours and then come back and see if I can have another 30 seconds. So with Wildman, what I was interested was an immersion experience. I was interested in creating wilderness training programs and programs that create ceremony for men to move through rites of passage to acknowledge the sage, the magi within, but not just to look at it and nod and say, yes, okay, now let's write about it for the rest of the day, but to actually go into it and then go into the next experience of it and the next experience of it, which for some people can be exhausting. But for most people, it's an opportunity to completely recalibrate, and it's an opportunity to not be fixed to the beliefs of what our stories are about ourselves. You know, because a lot of people bring stories to the table. I am this, I am this. So if we can empty ourselves and surrender into a full spectrum experience in a given chunk of time, as well as being witnessed by other men, or in the co-ed experiences by men and women, there's an opportunity to retell the story itself, and recalibrate, reset, moving forward. So that's the essence of where the Wildman came from, and that is really a derivative from a lot of the sacred journeys that we've been doing, specifically Ireland, because we've been working with taking groups over to Ireland for 6 years now. And oftentimes several groups a year, and that too is very much about getting people out of story. You know, we ask people, especially now, years into it, we really ask people, you know, leave your phones behind, leave your connection to the digital world behind, so that you can listen to that organic inner temple and step into a place of timelessness that's not going to have a wormhole from my consciousness and my brain to some other activity or doing somewhere else on the planet. Allow it to be through the within, and therefore there becomes an opportunity to track what we call our dragon lines. You know, some people speak of the ley lines as dragon lines, but also the synergy of the dragon aspect of our DNA. So like, where is our body timeless? Where is that DNA that goes back to the first man and woman? Where are we a continuation of that, and allowing that part of ourselves to come to life? So that's a big piece of it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And that's like my inspiration for doing this show is a lot about, like, I find that the deepest elements of creativity that I've tapped into and been able to channel have been through, you know, some call it a spiritual work, some call it just, you know, connecting with the true nature, whatever it is, but like that, letting go of the mental processes, letting go of the technology and all the you know, the mind stuff, and really embodying who you are deep below all that, you know, and allowing it to come out. And so many people have different ways of doing it, but very few people actually have like a program established for it, you know, to where you can like go and, you know, kind of get out there and have it facilitated in such a cool way like that. And I think that's a really awesome gift that you're providing for people. And I think that
one thing that is really important too is that part of the way showing that I'm embodying is, yes, to create container, and yes, to guide people through experience, but then again, remembering that keynote of the most potent moments in my life, oftentimes, where when I let go and I went off by myself, or was in a state of consciousness that was as if I was in, you know, in God consciousness, or in connection with my immortal nature, if you will. And so really creating a lot of space that people have that opportunity to find that on their own as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when people are shown the way, you know, like if there's somebody there that's allowing them, like you said, with the path in the woods or whatever, it's like sometimes you just need someone to cut that path through for you. And, you know, especially with the craziness of our world. But considering the fact that you're so open to talking about pretty like elaborate concepts and pretty deep subjects, you know, I wonder if you could just kind of just tap into that and maybe give me a little bit of, you know, what that looks like for you. I mean, I know you kind of already have, but as a person who's kind of dwelling in this place all the time, you know, what does inspiration look like? Like when you go into that space, like what can you bring away with it, and what can other people expect?
The first word that comes to mind is permission. There is when we choose to step into a container, whether it's self-created or, you know, someone's giving financial energy or some other sort of energetic exchange to someone to help establish space or create an experience for them, they're giving themselves permission to do it themselves. And I feel like that's a really important fundamental aspect of how I move and walk, is that there's constantly an invitation, and it's up to us whether we accept it or not. One of the most simple yet illuminary in the world experiences I had within the last year was over at Arunachala in India. So kind of in the southeast of India. I spent a month there, and it's a holy mountain that is the embodiment of Shiva. And I think one of the most important things to really distill there is that in a lot of indigenous as well as Hindu culture and Celtic culture, there is not a separation between nature and humanity. There's not a separation between the divine and physical. So the mountain actually is the Lord Shiva, and the Lord Shiva is actually the mountain. And then, of course, there's spectrums and multi-layers within that. So as I'm walking around the mountain, I'm walking on the chest or the breast or the phallus or the brow of the Lord Shiva, and there are hundreds and hundreds of different doors into the divine. And there's many choices of what those look like. It could be just on this 3D, could be many of the hundreds of shrines, or the ashrams, or the temples, the little prayer niches, or even the thousands of sadhus that are lining the streets. You know, like how many sets of eyes there are to connect with. And what I found was, as I was looked into the eyes of some of the sadhus, was a very clear, oh, no, this is not a door for me. Or I get to a certain shrine, and I would see the lines of people lined up to do a puja outside of the door, and like, this one's not for me. And then sometimes I get to one, and it's just like, this is the door for me. Or I'd look into the eyes of one of the sadhus and say, wow, yes, like I just, in 30 seconds of sharing eyes and bowing to each other with prayer hands, there was more exchange there than most connections I have in an entire lifetime. And so in that is a reminder that there may be as many doors to God or to the divine as there are humans, and maybe even beyond. And so what I often find is that when I let go of the need to be the doorway for anyone and everyone, anything but myself, then I've received a level of grace and remembrance. And when I remember that everyone is a doorway to the divine, or every aspect of creation is an invitation to the divine, but that whatever my constellation is, or whatever my structure is, or whatever my epigenetic nature might be most acclimated to, only certain doors are going to speak. It's kind of like trying to get a square peg into a round hole kind of concept. And so there's a remembrance of a level of respect to all the different ways there are to enter in a sacred or a reverent way, or to enter into a state of inspiration, awe, reverence. And what does that do? That opens us back up, whether it's our heart, our mind, it opens us up to a place of receptivity where we don't need to be the authority, where we can just become an empty vessel, and then recognize that the skills that we have harnessed are simply an aspect of the lens through which we look and through which we work and through which beings are attracted thus to us. And so I think that's how I would answer your question.
Well, I think that's a great answer. I think those are the kind of things that, that you kind of overlook when you're constantly, my focus a lot with this show is artists and creativity, but, from like a more of a heart-centered spiritual kind of way, where you're not just doing it for the vain aspect of doing it, but you're doing it as like an extension of your true self, and you're kind of connecting with it. And a big thing that I always come into is that we all have different ways, we all have different modes of expression. We all have, it's like the varieties of music out there are similar to the varieties of spiritual experience that we can have. And each person has their own specific way, and it's only going to make sense to them under that certain banner, and connecting with that is really the key. And like, having discretion, like you're saying, like knowing that not every temple, it holds it, it possesses it, but maybe it's not for you. I think that's a really cool point. And I think that's probably, you tell me, maybe that ties into your book, Ports of Entry. It seems pretty compatible subject to move into your book a little bit. Maybe you could just talk about how you told me before we started recording that this has been in the works for a number of years. And, it wasn't until certain things lined up that allowed you to actually bring it all together. But maybe if you could tell that whole story and where that connects with the Ports of Entry, like, as the title alludes to.
Well, maybe I'll reverse engineer it and actually start there with Ports of Entry.
Okay,
so
great.
About, if you do an inquiry or online for Ports of Entry, it typically brings you to, different customs or different places where ships come in, from overseas, or where the boundary between two countries are. What's the filtration process that's necessary before the gate opens to allow someone in, and why are they there? Maybe they're there to exchange goods and services. Maybe they're there to study. Maybe they're there to listen, visit family. Who knows? Why do we seek access to different doorways? And so, the essence of Ports of Entry is recognizing that in the 3D, there are access points that, similar to like if you look at like a two-dimensional mandala, like a mandala is a gate, it's a flat image, but when you meditate on it, or if your consciousness is moving fast enough and you are in relationship with the symbols, there is a direct passage or portal into another stream of consciousness, or into another place on the planet, or into the galaxy, whatever have you. And so in context with the book, basically what we're looking at is that, so in 3D we were invited to be in a certain place on the planet. So they're set in various cultural contexts, and most of these are ones that I've spent a lot of time living, working, studying, and traveling in. So there's a lot of American First Nations stories, there's a lot of Celtic stories, a lot of Nordic Germanic stories, there's some Greek stories, Middle Eastern stories, and there's many other stories that are not in this book, but these are the ones that came together herein. And I think one of the best ways to look at it is like, just as a 2D mandala offers an opportunity to step through, in the 3D there are sacred site structures as well as raw PowerPoints, where when we step into them in a sacred and reverent way, and we bring all of the necessary passports or whatever it is that allows you to access the gateway, that 3D all of a sudden becomes multidimensional. And so time bends, the physical space bends, and so I can be sitting in a cave in Ireland and simultaneously be sitting on top of a mountain in India or in Pakistan. And so there is a recognition that this portal has opened in a way, or this port has opened to allow entry and to witness whatever it is that I've been invited to witness, and then to bring some of that back with me to 3D.
So is the basic concept of it kind of about that, the our spiritual, our like literature and stuff being an interpretation of what is behind those ports, like what is within those, and like how we bring it back and how we share it as mythology and poetry and all these things, like that's our own specific interpretation of what we express or experience there.
Yes and no, because one of the things I really had to play with when I was deciding how to categorize the book was, like, it's certainly not a self-help book, and it's certainly not a how-to book. I don't read those books myself, like what. So the best way that I found was just to assume that the reader has access to those places of their imagination, swelling, thriving within their own consciousness, so that then when they step into one of the short stories that's in this book, that they are instantly there. And that's how the stories assume. They don't, most of them don't lay out a big precursor. It almost assumes that people have some sort of cultural and mythological context to each of the nations, which in a future edition, I may end up adding a glossary to the back that'll have, definitions of terms and places and things like that. But, for the first iteration, this feels right. So it's really just like an instant invitation. One of the closest things that I can maybe try to tie it to in terms of how these stories are told is similar to like a lot of the Japanese like dream film, where you just like drop into another world, and sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. I didn't try to come back from these experiences and try to like tuck them into a nice row and get them into a nice Roman military camp, but instead I chose to allow them to be free Celtic knots winding in amongst the trees of our consciousness and to be anchored into our bodies through the experience of reading. So it's more like the true art of the Celtic bard, if you will, where the job is to create an experience through the music or through the writing or through the spoken word that invites someone in, so they begin to connect with the characters in the story in a way where they can't separate themselves from it. Or they can separate themselves from it, but it's almost like they're watching it as if in a dream. And I think there's one other piece there that I feel is important, and it's that it's also written in a way so that there is current moving between the words. So it's like you could reread it another time, and even though the words might be the same, it's going to change because it's kind of pitching through multiple different levels of density at the same time.
So it sounds to me kind of like you already alluded to with the bards and stuff, where it's like traditional Native American storytelling and stuff, where it's like it's this whole different style of storytelling that it's more experiential, where it's less about a beginning and an ending or even a specific a point, if you will. Like it doesn't even have like a moral connection to it. Are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Sorry, you froze up here. But yeah, it sounds like it has that kind of flavor to it. And so did you write it based upon like personal experience with like going into these dream times, or is it more based out of other mythologies and things like that? Both. Okay.
Yeah, so whenever I have done work, and whether it's in indigenous and at-risk communities or just in different places in the world, I have always made a really strong effort to study the language, the culture, the mythology, the geology of the place before going, so that I can show up and be in respect. And before I do any sort of ceremonies or offerings, I will watch what all of the indigenous people or the local people are doing in order to be sure that I'm honoring the aspect of the power of of sacredness in place in respect to what is known. And so many of these stories really have this really fine line between being what I would call living mythology, where it's like, instead of reading an old ancient tale, say out of the Edda or out of the mythologic era of Ireland, or out of some classic story told around the fire, on the the Sioux reservation or something like that. These are instead, it's just like, oh, who are the characters that are involved in the world between worlds, and what happens when I bump into them in my dream time, or what happens when I bump into them in ceremony, or what happens when I bump into them when I'm out wandering the landscape and making an offering. And yeah, maybe some part of me is projected through into another timeline or into another dimension, and there's important messages to be brought back. And so again, all of these are told in this form of a short story, and some of them you're literally dropped right in the middle of it. You're like, whoa, what's the context? Where's the Ursula Le Guin does a lot of that in a lot of her short stories. And then some of them have a natural kind of arc that comes up and follow the traditional, more romantic tale of, antagonists and protagonists, and then there's some sort of culmination at the end. But most of them are just like, if you were to take a snippet of magical moment or a snippet of some important crossroads in mythology and how that is connected to humanness. And so, more aptly answer your question, yes, they are personal experiences, but very few of them are told like, hi, I'm Jeremy, and I'm going to, what's the archetype that I was embodying in the experience? How does that being sit in mythology, and then what was the actual experience that was unfolding?
Cool.
Yeah,
I like that kind of setup with stories. It makes it so interesting when you get in. You have to think a lot. You have to kind of you have to feel a lot more than anything. You kind of have to how does this make me feel? Like, I studied some indigenous literature from different things, like when the storytelling that was written down, it wasn't initially written, but a lot of the First Nations and the Native American stories that I read were just so hard to grasp, because the moral implications, how we see them, are so different, obviously, and also the way that it's told, and the overall point of it all. It's a very different approach. So I always find that really intriguing when people can kind of dip their toes into that world and share it. I think another interesting thing about it all is the whole spiritual journey for people in this country is so, there's a lot of, it's a melting pot. There's a lot of influences, whether it's traditional Christian kind of approach, or you get the Eastern approach, which a lot of us go towards. You get the indigenous approach, and all these things kind of come together in a lot of our lives, especially here in Asheville. But a lot of times it's hard for people to, if they hear these kind of things and they are not familiar with it, it's hard for them to connect. And it's like, how is that relevant to my life? And expressing that, and this is one of my favorite things with Joseph Campbell, and he always talked about the artist being kind of like the original priest, where art is the mythologization of the society, of culture, and how we use that to express these things. And I think books, music, all these things do it so well. And the reason why I say this is because the one workshop that you guys did at Levolution, the holotropic breathing thing, where there was didgeridoos and there was music and there was all just breath work with it. I've done all kinds of crazy things, and I've done plant medicine ceremonies, and I've done things that you ingest that give you an experience. But when you just use things that are direct like that and have an experience like I had that day, it's really profound. And you were leading it, you were singing, and there was all kinds of cool stuff going on behind it. But I wonder if you could kind of talk about that, how you lead those kind of things, and you very clearly, I can see it in your face, that these spaces are very real and they're very potent, and you don't need external sources. They are contained within the body, they're contained within the soul, and maybe you could just kind of share some of your experiences with that.
With leading a breath work like
that, or basically just clearly you're sharing this kind of stuff with people through your book and through your other work, and it's a very close thing to you, and maybe I just want to see if you can kind of give people a little understanding of how deeply connected you are with it.
Okay, well, so I'm pulling two pieces out there to touch into. So the first one, I'm going to kind of wrap it from the end there. One of the things that I have really enjoyed is the study of languages. And I'm conversational in German, conversational in Spanish, barely, but enough that I can squeeze by. I'm learning Irish. I've learned a little bit of Portuguese, enough that sometimes one of those languages pervades my dreams, and enough that I'm dreaming in the language completely and in understanding. What I find with the study of language is there is a linguistic tie to cultural context. Indigenous languages oftentimes have sprung from the very landscape that the people are based in. It's like you think of the way German sounds as a language. It's very much a language that grew from stones and mountains and forests. Same with the Celtic language. It's a tree language. In all of its different branches. They speak of the Irish language as being the language of the trees. There is a codex within the language itself. And so to back out to a little more broad spectrum, having spent many years studying the sciences and ecology and botany and learning the realm of Latin in respect to species names and interrelationships and explaining anatomy, there is a whole world view that is created in that context. But then I could switch over into dream plane, into dream language, and how the fusing of words together becomes much more than just the structure of physical sounds that come out of the mouth, but it's also the container, the essence that's behind it. So one of my favorite things to do, one of my favorite challenges in life is to find the translations, find the common language, so even if we're speaking both in English, where are the places that we can agree to certain terms? Like I just got off the phone with a group who, one group who we'll be working with was talking about gray water, and the other half of the group that we're working with was calling it processed water. Well, it's one and the same thing, but it's a matter of semantics and how they have focused or what their study is. And so, okay, now that we've figured it out, let's decide which one we're going to call it, or if we're going to go back and forth between. So in the same right, in the realms of navigating spirit, I would never put any particular tradition on a pedestal above any other, nor would I look down on any spiritual tradition, because just as I was speaking of India earlier and the many doors to God and to the divine, that's what we're looking at, and I think what I oftentimes look for then is, where are the people who are illuminated within their field? Where's the anthropologist, or where's the mechanical engineer, or where is the politician, or where is the priest, or where is the being that is so lit up that it's the awe and reverence that's guiding them, and it's not the structure that they are birthed from. And they recognize that the structure is simply a way of creating guidance. It's a way of showing. It's a way of illustrating to someone what the proper steps, or what they've learned as the proper steps, or what have been passed down as the proper steps are, in order to reach what is necessary and navigate their way through. So I think that that's probably the most important piece that I can speak to in that way, is where's the common language? Where's the translation? I love engaging in conversations with people who are very remotely removed from the common language that perhaps we would use, say, here in Asheville or in Boulder or San Francisco or something like that, where there's certain colloquials, that we might use, oh, it's all good, that says something to you. Somebody else might say, that sounds like, something wackadoodle, what's that mean to you?
Yeah.
So when I'm speaking to someone who can barely speak English in English, or if I'm speaking to someone in German who speaks fluently, we have to choose our words very carefully so that the true message that's being shared can be imperative. And so in that same way, if someone is in a place of really wanting to understand how we're navigating through the landscape of the mind, the consciousness, and spirit, it's not to like come into the room like blazing and telling everybody this is how to do it and this is what it is, but instead to walk in and say, hey, how do you connect? And then therefore like, oh, okay, well I can in my mind scramble that and translate that into a language form that you understand, so thus we're speaking the same language, because that's, to me, the most important thing is the essence behind and within. It's not the words, it's not the structure, it's not how pretty someone is or how pretty their house is, it's what's inside. What are they doing with it when they're inside of it, and what are we doing with inside of ourselves? That's where the rich soil for me is, and what I hunger for, and thus what I seek. And so I actually will have a tendency, if I end up becoming too social with people who are so settled in a way of being in so many different types of colloquials, that I'll change hats and I'll change where I place myself just so that I can keep my consciousness and my mind on edge enough that I don't settle in so much that I forget what it means when I say something is all good. You know, or when I say, oh, I'm following my heart, you know, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, like you have a feeling, you have a cultural context for what that means to you, but someone who, you know, is a conservative Episcopalian or a conservative Catholic might say, well, what's that mean? You know, so like, how would we define that in terms of the church or the Christ or, you know, the Christian mysteries or what have you? So
Yeah, I think about even, you know, slightly more subtle. It's just like cliches, you know, where something simple like that, where somebody says a thing that is very important to them, maybe, but it's total cliche to you, so it loses all its meaning. You know,
exactly.
I find that very fascinating too. With taking it back to music for me, just because, you know, somebody can speak something so clearly to you personally with the same words that mean nothing to somebody else. And it's all about your intention and your connection to that. And you know, I can understand your reference to that in terms of the work that you're doing and the amount of, you know, the scope of it all. You know, if you're, especially if you're connecting to so many different traditions and cultures and stuff, it's a lot. And like you said, like there's different. I truly believe too that, like, you know, what we call sacred is kind of a pervasive element. Like all life, you know, is, in my opinion, it has that sacred, you know, it's special unto itself, you know, it doesn't need my validation, but it's the recognition of that makes it sacred to me, you know. And if I don't recognize it, then that's why we destroy the streams and we deforestation and, you know, all those things, whereas indigenous cultures would never have dreamed of that. And it's just a, you know, the situation's diluted. But anyway, we've been going for a while here, and I don't want to keep you too long, but I wanted to get to, you know, I think you have a lot of cool insights with a lot of this stuff, and I always ask people for advice for others who are interested in whatever the path that they're, you know, if we're listening to somebody who's a writer or a musician or, you know, an artist or whatever. But first, do you have any like specific practices that you use to, you know, connect you with that kind of space and that spirit, you know, whether it's on your retreats or it's in your personal daily life? You know, do you have anything specific that you use that, you know, help you kind of get into that space?
Yeah, I do. I tend to do about a 30 to 40 minute Qigong practice every morning,
right,
with a seated meditation afterwards. For me, I'm very much a doer and a hot-blooded northerner, so to me, Qigong as a practice is a great way to trick my mind into think I'm actually doing something, because I'm doing, you know, repetitive movements. Some of them I've been doing for 21 years now, and so there's like a place where I can sink in a sense of familiarity, and, you know, and then once my mind has been tricked and I'm just flowing and flowering like water or a tree, then, you know, I move into a seated meditation where I just allow the softness of the universe to empty and fill me in nothingness. And then typically as I'm coming out of that, I see more clearly where places are in my life where adjustments need to be made. You know, oh, I need to contact this person, or I need to follow up with this, or I need to let go of that, or I need to sustain this relationship of reciprocity with this spot in Ireland that hasn't been on my radar, or with this mountain near the house, or whatever that might be. So it's like receiving like marching orders from my immortal nature.
Nice. Yeah. No. That's awesome. I always like to ask that question to people because that's how I am too. Where it's like you need those practices ground you enough to where you can reach the other things with clarity. And like your action is born out of inaction, which maybe for you it's a little bit reversed. It's like action, inaction, into action again. But
Right.
I think that's really cool. And Qigong is something that I've dabbled with a little bit. I did that one little class with you did there, and
Yep.
it seemed like you had a lot of experience with it, and it was so nice to just have that flow. And even people who've never done it before, usually if they are relaxed enough and settle into it, they can just, there's something about it that really is cleansing and healing in that way. And I know that you said you teach a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't teach any ongoing courses. I did that for a number of years. So I started practicing back in 1998 or 97, and started teaching in 2004. And at one point, I was teaching 7 or 8 classes a week, and on an ongoing basis, usually in chunks of time. But what I found was that unless I did something like as a block, so like 8 weeks, we're going to learn this particular segment, that it really helped to keep me up on my own personal practice, to stay above the edge of where I normally would be, in order to help provide, as a way shower, a pathway to others. And it helped me to really refine my languaging in terms of kind of the more poetic guidance that I lead people with as we're moving through it, as you might remember. But I also got to a point after doing it for a few years where I realized that it was that was not the direction that I needed to be going, but it was an important step to get there. So then I just began teaching Qigong at retreats, either people's retreats that they had me come out and teach at, just as like a morning movement session or an evening movement session, and then personal practice. And honestly, I feel really good with where I'm at with that right now. And it's like I use a lot of the Qigong practices that have been a part of my life in the various programs that I do, as well as the Irish Celtic Mystery School, as again a way of helping to embody. Obviously, it's not a traditional Celtic practice, but there is the traditional Celtic practice of what's called torquing. It's not twerking, but torquing. And it's very similar to Qigong, but nobody knows exactly what it looks like because it was a talent that was lost sometime in the Middle Iron Age, about the time when the Vikings started coming in. So, but we do know that it was a series of really intensive movements and breathing exercises that help bring someone to what could be called the Bab state, which would be kind of like our zone. It's the place that we would get to before going into a really critical alliance or battle or social political exchange or economic exchange.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah. So maybe just as a last thing too, like let's touch back into that. If you have any advice or direction for people if they want to kind of connect in this way, and it doesn't have to be anything specific or oriented to any specific thing you do, because you, like I said, you do a lot, but I always like to see if there's one little nugget that people could take away from this conversation that could like enhance them and kind of let them connect with the work that you do. What would that be?
I think the simplest thing would be that we should know what your strengths are and know what your weaknesses are. Don't try to glaze over what your weaknesses are, and don't underplay your strengths. And know how to call on help, how to call in allies, and both allies of this world and the other. If you're not that great at business, have a business partner. If you're not that great at speaking, have a speaking partner. If you're not great at writing, have a writing partner. If you're not great at cooking food, find a cook. Utilize the energy that you have in the things that you're good at to apply towards the things that you're really good at, and strengthen the things that you're not so good at by working with people that are better than you.
Awesome. Is that it all connect into some of the stuff that you do on your retreats especially with the wild men kind of thing?
Definitely, definitely.
Awesome.
We'll have guys from all levels of experience being on those Into the Wilds wilderness programs, that, and then, on the level of when we do our big ceremonial weekends, like we do in August, those same thing. It's like I've got a team of 5 people from all over the country who are amazing, potent, powerful beings, and I could not do it without. Well, I mean, I probably could do it without them, but it would not be the same because again, it's like coming from a united front, coming from a place of look what happens when we work in collaboration, and that speaks in greater volumes than just saying like, hey, why don't everybody come hang out with me and I'm going to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell anybody what to do.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's great. Do you have anything coming up that you want to share with people? Any workshops or those retreats or anything like that?
Sure. Yeah. So we've got what we call Wild Man Into the Wilds weekend, July 20th to 22nd, and that will be here in the Southern Appalachian Mountains. There's still, I think, 1 or 2 spaces left on that weekend. Cool. That's a really accessible, economically, the kind of like entry point, and also getting people out into the wilds. August 24th to 26th, we have our 5th annual Wildman Gathering, and that's our 4 elemental ceremonial weekend. And usually we have about 50 to 70 guys from all over the country that come out for that. And we actually have a information call on that on June 24th, which people can find out on Facebook or on my webpage. Then September, I have 2 programs that we're running in Ireland. One is called Unexpected Ireland, and it's focused on tracking the dragon lines both in our body as well as in the physical landscape. And then we also, the last 2 weeks of September, we do the Irish Celtic Mystery Program. Both of those programs are full, but the next iteration of the Irish Celtic Mystery Program starts this year at Samhain, and so we ask that people are committed by the equinox in September.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm curious, and I know I just asked you like the last question, but I want to know a little bit about the Irish Celtic Mystery Schools, what you teach and what kind of is in that.
Yeah, so one of the things that is often available in a lot of the Celtic literature out there can be very general, or it can be really focused on Arthurian traditions or pre-Arthurian traditions. And although in Ireland there's a renaissance of literature available, it's, the idea of Ireland and the idea of all things Celtic has, in the last 15-20 years, really surged forward. But there's a lot of mixing, and so in the terms of refining the Irish Celtic mysteries, it's really looking at the interconnection of the sacred landscape of Ireland with the Wheel of the Year. There's a particular codex of the Wheel of the Year that sits in respect to the original 4 sacred kingdoms of Ireland and to their respective matron goddesses, and so this is a big part of it. What we do is we meet for a year starting at Samhain at the end of October, and we have 4 weekends together for what are called the cross quarter or the fire holidays. And so we meet at Samhain, we meet at Imbolc, we meet at Balsany, and we meet at Lunasa, and then we all go over to Ireland together for 2 weeks to go to the sacred sites that we're lighting up for the group for the year, and then we all come back together for Samhain again for graduation. Some people move on and do further studies, and some people just complete. So Samhain is both the entry point as well as the completion point. Samhain is the beginning of the Celtic year.
Okay.
And so that's why we begin there.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it gets into mythology, it gets into ecology, it gets into history, it gets into modern culture, it gets into art, it gets into music, and then also a lot of the deep transformational, because a lot of the work, as we talked about earlier, with working with the sacred sites and the dragon lines, we are helping by showing the way to various portals or gateways that help to illuminate the darker places in our DNA and our soul, so that we can be more refined in how we move forward.
Wow.
within the Celtic lens. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. There's so like I've been fascinated by the the Celtic world for a long time, but I felt like it was really like what we get on the top, like on the surface level of that, is so diluted. It's fairies and gnomes and things, and it like alludes to this whole like mystery, but it doesn't. There's rarely information on it. But over the last couple of years, I've found some works from people, and there's this one specific teacher. I listened to a talk he gave about the traditions of Celtic, the Celtic spiritual traditions, and it is so deep and so fascinating. I'd love to check that out. I don't know. I'll have to look more into it.
Okay. Yeah, we're happy to talk. We've got a great cohort starting to come together for next year.
Awesome.
Pretty amazing people. So
I bet. Well, cool, man. It's really awesome what you're doing. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you asking and reaching out.
Yeah, totally, man. And I think it's really cool. For anyone who doesn't know that you're in Asheville, and you obviously do a lot of different things. Do you have a specific website? I'll put the links up and everything. But do you have a website for all this?
The Enchanted Journeys is the best, sort of clearinghouse for all of this. Enchanted begins with an I, so it's sort of like the turning within.
Okay.
Enchanted.
Cool.
We have a few other websites for a lot of the conservation and indigenous rights work that we're doing around the world. But a lot of those are linked off of the Enchanted Journeys site, so that's probably the best place to send people to.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have it up there with Facebook stuff too and all that. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure it was out there for everyone to listen. So.
Okay.
Cool, brother. I appreciate you coming on.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for listening, and we will check you next time.